11.0, major new stuff. We're going to dig in a little bit of the product. Some of the major highlights are the new virus blocker and spam blocker. The apps are basically the same, except they have an entirely new back-end engine. We partner with a company called Bitdefender, which, for those of you familiar with Bitdefender, we're really excited about that because they offer one of the best, if not the best, antivirus engine out there. Also, some stellar spam blocking stuff. So if you look at some of the independent test sites, you'll frequently see Bitdefender as the #1 or #2 out of dozens and dozens of vendors. They frequently test every month, and they're always up near the top. So we're really excited to be able to offer that finally to our Untangle users. We also added some technology from the IC Control products. For those of you that follow along, we have a separate product called IC Control, which is more for very large organizations, and they have some really amazing technology in that product, and we've moved some of that technology over into the NGFW Untangle product that you guys use. So we're really excited to be able to finally start moving some of that into NGFW. Some other cool features, like we now have event logs for search queries for those of you that process HTTPS traffic. You can monitor what people are searching for on your network. We also have some improved license management technology, which we'll go a little bit into, and a whole bunch of other stuff. So at this point, I'm actually going to switch over to the wiki. And yes, before, no audio?
No, we're going through the
Okay,
old.
good. Thank God. We had so many comments last time about me using Windows XP on the webinar machine that I Googled which one is the best OS from Microsoft, and universally agreed that Windows 98 was the best Microsoft operating system. So now we're giving that a try. You should check it out. It's pretty good. So you can follow along wiki.untangle.com. Click on Change Logs, and then click on 11.0, and that goes into some of the changes in 11.0. Not everything, but most of the stuff that you'll really care about. And actually, I should address this before we get into it. For those of you running 10.2 or 10.1 or 10.0, you will not yet see the 11.0 upgrade. It will be coming in a matter of weeks. You can download a new one, but we release upgrades slowly over time to the whole population of existing boxes. That's just for several reasons. One, if we want to make absolutely sure that all the upgrade conversions work 100% correct in all cases. And two, we just don't want to kill our servers because the download in this case is actually quite big. So it'll be rolled out over time. So don't panic if you don't see it yet. That's fine. If you want to get access to it now, you can contact support. Otherwise, you'll see it in a number of weeks. So on the wiki, we talk about some of the major changes. Under the covers, one of the biggest changes is that now we're based on Debian Wheezy. Debian Wheezy is the now stable version of Debian. We're really excited about that because we're now in the most current version of Debian ever. We're now running on 3.2 kernel, which is pretty new, and also had some nice performance changes that we checked into that kernel change as well. So when you upgrade, you will be running your existing kernel. Obviously, it's not going to reboot in the middle of an upgrade. So what it will do is it'll install the new kernel, and then when you reboot, it'll try to boot into the new kernel. So after you upgrade, you can reboot if you want, and when you reboot, it'll get the new kernel. It'll still run fine on the old kernel. That's no big deal. But if you want to run the new kernel, you can reboot, and then you'll be on the 3.2 kernel. And again, this is all hidden under the covers. You won't see anything different in the UI that indicates any of this. But from a product standpoint, this is a step forward, especially for the people who get around on the command line and mess around, and just being current. As I already talked about, the new virus blocker, let me log into a machine real quick, is based on Bitdefender. In all other ways, it looks the same, but it has a new technology behind the covers. And we think you'll find on the virus side especially that it just catches a lot more. Do you still have audio issues, you think?
We've had some intermittent reports of people having problems either from their mic or from the phone, and some people, if you are having trouble on one, try the other.
I can still hear you guys just fine.
Okay. So this is the new virus blocker. As I said, it's pretty much the same in all ways from the UI perspective, but behind the covers, it's actually a completely new engine. In fact, we can look at the reports, except my Firefox is dead. Come on, Firefox. You can do it.
Well, that's what you get for using Windows 98.
No, it's the newest and best. That's what it said on Google.
Haven't you upgraded to Netscape Navigator yet?
We're working on that. I was trying to show the reports so we could see, but for whatever reason, I can't access the reports right now. Oh, that's because I'm typing the wrong IP.
One question while that's coming up, does OpenVPN support IPv6?
No, I don't believe so. If you're using IPv6, could you type "I'm using IPv6" in the chat box? I'm just curious as to how many people are actually using it.
We had a question here about the free versions of Spam Blocker and Virus Blocker and whether or not they'll run the new Bitdefender engine as well.
No, the free Virus Blocker still uses Clam, and the free Spam Blocker still uses Spam Assassin. The Spam Blocker Lite and Virus Blocker Lite. I don't think they would love it too much if we gave their software away for free. It would probably make us go broke pretty quickly. What I'm doing is bringing up the Virus Blocker reports on a live site. I was hoping to show you how effective the new antivirus engine is. So this is in a week, which is, I don't know, this is not a huge site or anything, but 110 viruses, and you can see all sorts of stuff here. Trojans, lots of Trojans, worms. So I think when you get on the new 11.0, you'll see it's much more effective at blocking things. Spam Blocker also uses the same engine now, Bitdefender behind the scenes. The Spam Blocker is basically Spam Blocker Lite plus Bitdefender on top. So it still uses Spam Assassin, but basically it uses Bitdefender as a plug-in to that. So it will have better spam detection than Spam Blocker Lite. Another feature we added to Spam Blocker is the ability to automatically bypass TLS sessions. TLS on SMTP is becoming exceedingly common nowadays. And in fact, some organizations are actually requiring that you send SMTP via TLS. Obviously, this conflicts with the way Untangle does spam detection, which is it's going to intercept SMTP between the sender and the receiver. And if it's TLS, it can't do that. So usually what it does is it removes the TLS advertisement from the server so that it doesn't allow them to use TLS, so it can snoop in and scan for spam. In some cases, you don't want that behavior, so now there's a checkbox here that you can say allow TLS, and basically it's just going to allow it and let it go straight through. So I wouldn't turn that on if you're worried about getting spam via TLS, but some organizations need that, so we've added that checkbox. So that should help those organizations that are having any issues with TLS.
Dirk, if you would, we got a lot of questions here about upgrading from one of the 9.x releases to version 11, and if you wouldn't mind just going over the upgrade to 10 and then the auto upgrade from 10 to 11.
Sure. So if you're still on 9, you can just download a new version of 11, and it's basically a new install. There is no upgrade path from 9 dot anything. We will likely be rolling out a 9.4.3 at some point with a couple minor updates, but basically there's no point which you'll be able to upgrade automatically to a 10.x or 11.x machine. It's a new install. There's a whole bunch of reasons behind that, but one is it's a huge difference in the network settings. There is a huge difference in the base OS. There's all sorts of things that basically can't be done as an automatic upgrade. So as a result, it's a completely new install. So you just go and download it and install it. If you want, you can write down all your settings or take screenshots or move your old settings over to a VM. But basically, you end up reinstalling. So if you reinstall anything on 10.x and later, you can upgrade to whatever is the newest. And hopefully that will always be true going forward.
And for folks who are already on 10, it is an auto upgrade to 11. You don't have to reinstall.
Correct. But it's not available to everyone yet, so if it's not available, you don't panic. It will be available at some point, hopefully in the relative future. Tons of questions coming in. I'm just going to keep chugging along. Give me a shout if you notice anything important. Web filter. Go back to the UI here. Web filter had a couple minor UI improvements, and also just it parses search queries to all the common search engines: Yahoo, Bing, I think Ask, and Google. And so now there's a new event log over here called the query event log, which this machine doesn't actually have any clients behind it, so you won't see anything. But if I search for whatever, it'll show up here as a query search, so you can see if people are searching for how to cheat on whatever whatever you care about. Something to keep in mind about this, though, that almost all of these search engines use HTTPS nowadays. Most of them by default, but not all of them. So in those cases, you'll have to run HTTPS inspector because the search engine query itself is encrypted. So the only way to see the query is if you actually do SSL man in the middle, which requires HTTPS inspector. So just keep that in mind if this is empty and you're searching for things, that unless you're running HTTPS inspector, you're not going to be able to see Google queries and Bing queries and things like that because those all use HTTPS. Directory connector, the new AD login monitor is now available. It basically has a wholly new UI. I mean, completely redesigned, has some really nice new features. You can do things like change ports now. It now has a table instead of this long hard-coded list of IPs. Really great features. We're going to be coming out with a new version shortly that fixes a few more bugs, but you can download it out of the wiki. You go to wiki and click on directory connector. You can scroll down. There's a link there. And also on the forums, there's a link under the 11.0 announcement if you click here. So that also uses the same API as the old one. So actually, you can run that on any 10.x version, the new AD login monitor. So if you're using the AD login monitor to basically send Untangle username information from your Active Directory server, which I recommend you try if you haven't, you can use the new one on any 10.x employment before you upgrade if you want as well. So if you just want to give it a try, go ahead and do it. It uses the same API. You can still use the old one with 11.0 if you also don't want to reinstall. It's just that this has some new improvements that I think are definitely worth trying out if you use this. If you don't use this and use the login script, I would try this out. It has some nice properties about not having to push out any scripts to your clients, and also it's a little more secure because then you don't have to open up the API publicly to those machines.
There are a few more questions around the upgrade. If you wouldn't mind sharing the version 11 page, Dirk, we have some content there to help folks who are still in the process of upgrading from 9.4 or previous versions to 10. Yes, you are going to need to reconfigure the machine. There is no automatic way to import your settings. A couple of folks were asking about that. So if you head on over to the version 11 page and look at the right-hand column, upgrading to NG Firewall version 11, you can get a little bit more detail there on what you need to do to make that upgrade.
That's on untangle.com/release, or if you just go to the home page and then it says V11, you click on Read More. You can see this. I'm reading through some questions. Give me just a second. Lots of questions. Unfortunately, a lot of these are pretty in-depth discussions.
You can also, if we don't get a chance to answer your specific question, you can always ask it on our forums at forums.untangle.com. And otherwise, you can also feel free to contact us at support@untangle.com, or if you have a sales or pricing related question, at sales@untangle.com.
Nancy asked, we are getting a new Untangle box the next week. Will 11 be on that box? Probably not. It'll be probably a couple more weeks before we start shipping 11.0. But even if you get 10.2, you can just auto upgrade when it's ready. In fact, it'll automatically upgrade if you have auto upgrade on when 11.0 is pushed to your, made available to your server. So I wouldn't sweat it. It's a really easy upgrade. You just have to press upgrade when it's ready. But you could also install 11.0 manually if you wanted. I don't just know if it's worth it though. But it'll be probably shipping pretty soon. IPsec VPN, we had a whole bunch of improvements to L2TP. The usernames are now stored in the host table. Let me show you what that means. It's worth just looking at the host table. It's an incredibly, incredibly valuable tool for those of you who don't already use it. But the host table, and it's the same as the session table, are basically ways to view all the devices and what's known about them on your network. Similar to how the session table works, you view all the sessions on your network and everything Untangle knows about them. The host table does the same thing, just views the devices that are basically either devices on any of the non-WAN interfaces or remote VPN clients. So now we've added the L2TP username to the host table. The link to the Active Directory login monitor is on the wiki. If you go to the wiki and you click on Directory Connector, down the page a little bit is a link to the newest AD login monitor. So if I click on Show Host at the bottom of the drop-down, that'll open up the host table, or the host viewer as we call it. And you can see all the different devices on this network. This network right at the top, you can see it has 55 devices currently. We'll loop back and talk about that when we talk about license enforcement.
We have a lot of folks asking when they will be eligible for the 11 upgrade, or what's the timeline to getting it out to everybody?
In the next 3-4 weeks, I would say. Everybody will probably have it available. Again, if you want to have it now, you know, you can contact support and ask for it. Also, there's a priority queue you can volunteer for on the forums. Just be aware that if you're in the priority queue, you're always going to get upgrades early. So I wouldn't do that on, like, if you're running a major, you know, like a 911 dial center or something.
And for those of you asking who don't have an Untangle already, yes, you can download it from the download page. We're mostly discussing the upgrade here.
So this is the host table. You can see all the different hosts on your network. And here you can see under username now, the VPN usernames are here. So you can see when they're connected, who is who. You can see this is my laptop and this is my home Linux machine. So you can see all the different users. So that's really useful if you want to create rules based on usernames or policies based on usernames or whatever. You can do that now with L2TP and OpenVPN. So both those are stored, which makes creating rules for specific users of VPN that you want to treat differently or give a different policy or just want to have reporting on them much better. Reporting will be nice because if you're running full tunnel, and you have lots of remote sites that are being filtered, remote clients that are being filtered, now the reports will have their usernames. L2TP DNS can now manually be configured, and L2TP now supports multiple WANs. So we've made a major effort to improve the L2TP. It's really useful for people who have a lot of remote Android devices and Apple devices that they need to control. We're going to continue working on that effort on 11.1. But basically, managing devices is becoming a major headache for a lot of organizations, and L2TP is a great way to do it because basically you can configure all your devices to say, I want them to go through Untangle filtering no matter where they live and not allow users to change those settings. And you can push it out with the Android Command Center very easily. So that's a great option if you have a lot of Android devices like a school or a hospital that gives out devices and needs to control them. So we've really been working on improving L2TP and OpenVPN. L2TP is a lot more useful because it doesn't require any more software to be installed on those devices. Otherwise, OpenVPN is a great solution.
We had several questions. We often get questions on this. Do we officially support VMware or Hyper-V with this version?
That's a tough one. You can run it on whatever hardware you want. We consider hypervisors to just be yet another version of some hardware. So yes, we will support your Untangle on any virtualizer. However, that being said, if you call into support and you have a lot of questions about your virtualizer, we're not experts in Hyper-V or Xen or VMware. Any one of those products, we can't support those products. So we can absolutely support Untangle within those products. But the question becomes, when you get into these details that are so specific to the virtualizer, we really can't help with those issues. We'll support everything in a VM and any kind of virtualizer. I know people use Hyper-V, and then VMware, and then some other guys say, I love VirtualBox, or I really like Xen. Everybody's got their favorite hypervisor. You can use whatever you like. We can help you with Untangle, but we can't necessarily be experts in all the virtualizers. So just keep that in mind as you're installing it. Question about WAN balancer. Does WAN balancer, can you balance traffic based on the application type? No, because the decision about what WAN to put the traffic on comes long before you know what application it is. All you see is that a new session is being created. So you can't really say, hey, in the future this is probably going to be a BitTorrent session, so I should put it on WAN 2. You don't have access to that information yet because nothing's happened. Lots of questions pouring in, sorry. Does L2TP support Active Directory? I don't think so currently. I may be wrong in that. I think it supports Radius right now. You can have your Active Directory server supply Radius so that Untangle can authenticate against it. So I would do that. So I guess in a way, yes. It doesn't authenticate against Active Directory specifically, but it authenticates against Radius. So you can do that, or you can use the local directory if you want. IPsec VPN does not support circuits with dynamic IPs. I think you can use the host name now. You didn't used to be able to use the host name. So you can use the host name now as a definition of one end of the tunnel. Obviously, that depends on DNS resolution. But if you set up your DNS so that it resolves currently, then yes, you can do that. The problem with IPsec tunnels is that both ends of the tunnel have both ends of the tunnel defined as some string. So they can't arbitrarily change that string because it's part of the tunnel definition. But you can use host names now as part of the tunnel definition. So if you have a dynamic IP and you do DNS properly so that when your IP changes, your DNS changes, you can use the host name as the channel definition. Are there plans to eventually allow mobile app for management of Untangle? There already is. You just open a browser, and the browser fully supports mobile. There probably won't be a specific app on top of using your browser, just because the resources required to do that probably wouldn't make it worth it, considering how often it would actually be done. But I would definitely use your browser to do so. Looking through questions real quick. Oh, man. Will an SSD help with network throughput? Probably not, unless disk write speed is your bottleneck. You can run an SSD. Some SSDs have reliability issues. They're really getting better on the whole. So we've seen significant improvement there, and we don't write as much as we used to in the old days. But unless you're really choked on disk I/O, it's doubtful that any disk is going to affect your network throughput, at least not on an immediate test. In the long term, when reports is running, if you're doing bandwidth tests in the middle of reports running, then maybe an SSD would help. Okay, I'm going to move. Sorry, there's tons of questions pouring in. We don't have time for all of them. I'm going to quick talk about license management. This is important for resellers or just Untangle users, I guess. It's not a major change, just something to be aware of if you see it. Nowadays, in the top of the rack, you'll see an alert. So if I bought a 50-seat license, I would currently be 5 devices too many on my network. So I would see an alert if that were the case, and it would say, I'm exceeding my current license. So when you log in, if it sees that you're currently over your license, it'll just show you a little warning saying, hey, you may want to take care of this. It doesn't actually do anything. It just warns you. You can go into the host table, and you can see which 5 devices are exceeding your limit. Because they will be given the host name and username unlicensed. Their traffic is still treated the same in all ways, so it still gets scanned. It's not like it's going to keep them from getting the internet or anything. But you can see in here that it'll say unlicensed, unlicensed. Obviously, if 5 of these users dropped off my network, those unlicensed servers would now be okay. So keep that in mind that when the count goes down, they would now be allowed. But when they're over the limit, they would have the name unlicensed. So that's new in 11.0, something to keep in mind. Can people hear us real quick? Is audio still working? Okay, hopefully audio is still working. Some people reported audio
Yes, it is. Sorry,
problems.
guys. I can still hear you.
Okay.
Thanks, Katie.
Thanks. Sorry about that, everybody. I don't know what's going on today with GoToMeeting, but yeah, we're having all sorts of audio problems.
Again, for those of you who have specific questions, either about your configuration, any technical support, please head over to support.untangle.com or contact us at support@untangle.com. And for sales questions or product-related questions, we're happy to walk you through it or do demos with you. Just contact us over at sales@untangle.com.
Oh, so I should talk about this. Do you accept your printers for a license limit? By default, anything that's scanned by Untangle in the application layer is considered counted. So if you're scanning your printer traffic for viruses and web filtering and so on, then yes, it's going to count towards that. However, if you want to say don't count it, you can just go in and add a bypass rule saying, well, I don't really want to web filter and virus scan my printer traffic. So just go in and create a bypass rule for that. Any device that it'll still show up in your host table, but since Untangle's not scanning sessions for it because it's bypassed, wow, Windows 98 just can't handle the load. Any device that is not having its traffic scanned won't be counted towards that. So just go in here and create a bypass rule for your printer saying, don't scan its traffic. It would be something like this, bypass printer, and then you'd say source address and whatever, and then just say bypass. So then it's not going to be counted towards your limit. So if you have, let's say, 50 devices on your network, right, your limit, and you want to allow guest Wi-Fi to come in. An easy thing to do is, let's assume you don't want to set up a separate Untangle for your guest Wi-Fi. You can just say, you know what, I'm going to add guest Wi-Fi and I'm going to bypass that entire network. So they'll still have internet connectivity. They just won't be web filtered and application controlled and bandwidth controlled and all that stuff. So that's always an option. If you're right at your limit, you don't want to go up to the next license and you want to add a guest Wi-Fi or whatever, or you just want to figure out how to get back in compliance, just add bypass rules. And then those devices aren't counted.
Just a couple questions on licensing. For folks who are on Untangle appliances, specifically someone was asking about the U150. Untangle appliances for NG Firewall are sold with an unlimited license, so you can run as many devices through that box as the box can handle. That is a difference from the software-only model, which is licensed based on devices.
For people asking, there's not a real difference between 10.x and 11.x in terms of license management. It's just now it's visible in the UI, and it's going to say unlicensed in the host table if you're exceeding it. So the traffic isn't really treated any differently, I guess, unless you have rules based on username, because the username is actually going to be unlicensed now. So just keep that in mind. But in other words, in the host table, everything else is going to be the same. It's still going to tell you the OS type. It's still going to tell you the IP. Can the system support 5,000 current users? That really depends on your hardware. There are lots of sites running tons of users, but it's really more of a hardware question. You've got to have good hardware if you're going to run tons of users. But yeah, that's not unheard of. How much free disk space is needed for an upgrade to 10? I wouldn't worry about that. The disk space is managed automatically. I mean, if your disk is full, then obviously you got other significant problems. But if it's not full, you won't. It doesn't require like an especially large amount of disk. The upgrade itself is actually pretty big compared to a traditional upgrade because the base Debian is getting installed, a new Wheezy, and those files are pretty big. So the upgrade itself we've seen take up to 5 or 6 minutes. Unlike a traditional upgrade where it stops processing traffic at the application layer immediately and then picks it up again when it's all done so that there's no traffic interrupted. In this case, the DNS server will actually be shut down for a minute or two because it is being upgraded. So keep in mind that in this case, if you're using Untangle for DNS, you can actually lose DNS connectivity, which will appear to be offline, of course. During those 2 minutes. If you don't use Untangle for DNS, you probably won't notice it because it continues to pass traffic. It just won't allow DNS resolution. So keep that in mind during this upgrade that it can take up to 5 minutes, and 2 of those minutes DNS is not handled. How many concurrent sessions can Untangle handle? It really depends on your all sorts of wild things. What kind of sessions they are, what kind of apps you have, what kind of hardware you have, how much memory you have, all sorts of things. There's no limit anymore. We removed the limit just because we got tired of people asking us about it. So you can knock yourself out, put it on as big of a network as you want. It really comes down to your configuration and, of course, hardware. Reading through any plans to allow wireless. We're looking into that. We're looking at all sorts of things. There's a lot of stuff that we did behind the scenes on 11.0 that unfortunately we weren't able to release yet, but those efforts will continue. And one of those efforts is looking at wireless. I won't say we're committed to wireless, but a lot of devices nowadays are coming with wireless built in, so it would be nice to be able to leverage that directly instead of having a separate wireless access point, so we continue to look at that. Which features from ICC have been added? Actually, several. One of the things we did, I guess this was 10.1 or something. The way we handle SSL is, in the case where you're not running HTTPS inspector, has actually improved quite a bit. We took a lot of that technology from ICC. So there's several modes. One is to use the SNI information to determine the site it's going to. And if that doesn't work, it will actually fetch the server certificate out of line and use the information in the server certificate to figure out what site it's going to. That's really cool technology we got from ICC. There's also some performance and kernel stuff that we got from ICC, especially help you in 11.0 in bridge mode. Bridge mode should be a little bit faster in 11.0. What else? There's some new captive portal enhancements that are coming from ICC. All sorts of things under the covers. I mean, there's no one easy thing to look at. There's some performance improvements at the traffic processing level that we're going to take from ICC. So a lot of technology from the ICC control product that is relevant is moving over to NGFW. ICC is a separate product that we offer for large organizations. It's a web filter.
You can find it on the site under IC control at the top.
We will have a recording this session, unfortunately, and maybe a little bit of a mess because of all the audio issues, but hopefully we can clean it up a little bit.
We send that out generally within 24 hours of the end of the webinar, so look for that in your inbox.
Yeah, this, by the way, Kenneth, is a cool feature. I don't know when we added this. This actually, it's somewhat recent. Basically, if you pass a certain site, let's say you block all sites, but you really want to allow Facebook. I don't know. That's a poor example. Wikipedia. Wikipedia obviously relies on all sorts of sites externally. So if you just block everything and then allow Wikipedia, it doesn't actually work because Wikipedia relies on these other sites to actually load all its content like JavaScript and stuff. So now there's a feature you can say, well, pass those other sites if they were referred to us from Wikipedia. So by checking that option, it allows you to actually get to Wikipedia and all the content on the other sites that Wikipedia requires with an exception because they were referred by Wikipedia. So it's a nice feature. I'm not sure when we added that, but it is relatively new. But for those of you that are blocking most of the internet and just want to allow certain sites, it's actually a great feature. That, by the way, was something we also took from IC Control because they do that and it works fairly well. The new Debian kernel, there's a couple questions about it. What it supports, what it doesn't support. As always, we're not going to spend our entire lives trying to support different hardware. There's just too much hardware out there. We try to say kernel Debian. Debian supports most hardware. If you want to know if your hardware works, unfortunately, it's just install it and see if it works. Debian, the new Wheezy, works on most hardware. We've had a lot of success getting it to run on almost anything, but some of it takes a little more work than others. So if you want to see it support specific RAID controller or whatever, unfortunately it comes down to installing it on a box with that and seeing if it works. If it doesn't work, then you can usually try some things like playing with BIOS settings and stuff like that, but in some cases it just plain doesn't work. And unfortunately, that's why we have appliances, is for those that don't want to deal with that headache of trying to figure out which hardware works and which hardware doesn't. Let me switch back to the wiki and make sure we covered everything. Oh, I do need to talk about this. This is really actually cool. Obviously, you notice the new application icons. The packet test, for those of you who do some troubleshooting, I should totally go into this because this is really cool. I closed my window, unfortunately. So the packet test is, there's all sorts of troubleshooting tools in config networking troubleshooting. I would really advise people use those when they're trying to troubleshoot anything on the network. Why can't this machine get online? Or why does this port forward not working? Those tools can really be useful. One of those tools is called the packet test, and the packet test basically is TCP dump. It's just a sniffer, and it allows you to view packets on the wire. Now we've added an export function so that you can export what was just sniffed as a file that you can later open in Wireshark or replay in TCP dump or whatever. So I'll just show that real briefly. Wow, yeah, this machine really does need to be replaced. Oh, man. So I'm sorry, I'm going to have to take back my comments about Windows 98 being the best. Under troubleshooting, under packet test. Oh, and the other thing we allowed is, for those of you familiar with the TCP dump syntax, there's now an advanced button. So you can click on advanced button and actually use the TCP dump syntax, which you can read the man page, but it's really in depth. And then I can say run test. So this is going to run a test. It's not going to see anything because there's probably not any traffic from 10.0.0.1. And it's listening on external. And then when I'm done, I can click export, and that's going to save a file that I can then open in Wireshark or TCP dump. So a really good feature for those of you who are trying to troubleshoot whatever on your network. I would highly encourage you to use this. Of course, you can always use it at command line, but for people who don't want to have access to the command line, you can do this. And always you can open 2 tabs and say, I want to listen to port 80 traffic on external and internal. And then you get 2 files which you can then open in Wireshark or whatever. There's new application control signatures. I think there were probably 50-ish new ones. Every time we do a release, we just update and see what the newest ones are available. SMTP v3 is now supported. So for those of you who use SNMP to monitor your Untangle server, this is a good option. I think it's under system. I should really know this. Does packet test mean we no longer have to run Wireshark from the console? Yeah, if you want. I mean, it basically does the same thing, and it just saves the file, and it shows you in real time what it's seeing. So you'll see, okay, I got 10 packets, and then you're allowed to export that file and see those 10 packets in Wireshark if you want. So I'm not in the right place for SNMP, am I? No, it's in administration, obviously. I'm such an Untangle noob. SNMP is really for monitoring. Somebody asked if you can use it with Splunk. I'm not sure if Splunk does SNMP or not. It probably does. So you can use it to monitor Untangle. SNMP is not an outbound thing. So there's all the v3 controls. Syslog is an outbound thing, and so you can send syslog to Splunk. In reality, in deployments I've seen, you just end up sending tons of information that's not necessarily useful. So the expense on the processing side may be more than it's really worth. But you can set up all sorts of interesting things in the syslog saying look for this specific string, and then send alerts to my cell phone if whatever happens. You can do all sorts of crazy things with syslog. Yeah, that's true. Actually, traps are outbound. So in that case, you can enable traps. Thank you for pointing that out, John. More input verification we added. So input verification is an ongoing effort in Untangle for years and years and years that we basically don't want to allow people to type in crazy things because bad things happen when you type in crazy things in the settings. So we've worked really hard into making sure that's not possible. So most fields have input verification now everywhere. Like if it expects an IP, you can't type in a host name, things like that. If it expects a port, you can only type in an integer. So we've improved a lot of the input fields, and also network settings. We have all sorts of sanity checks that we added saying don't let people save settings that absolutely never make sense. So if we know there's never a scenario where this makes sense, don't allow it to be saved. So if you get a warning when you save saying there's a problem here, that's because there's some inconsistency in your settings that it won't allow you to save. So just keep that in mind. Like if I added a route for a route that already exists, or if I have two interfaces with the same IP, any of that kind of stuff, it's going to warn on now and say, this doesn't make any sense. If I try to disable my block all rule, which I'm sure no one would ever do because it's crazy. Local directory can now be imported and exported. That's just been a feature request for a long time. As part of that, remember, it does export the passwords because otherwise you can't import it into the to-do machine. So I would be very careful what you do with that export file if you do export it. They're not in the clear. I think they're basically very lightly hashed, so you don't have to worry about accidentally reading them, but they're more or less in clear text. So keep that in mind if you do export it, that the passwords are going to be in them. Oh, another cool feature is Captain Portal now you can use HTTP host name. So if you want to say, oh, I don't want to block this certain site, and that site is not by IP, so you want to allow, I don't know, Google, but nothing else, even though you're not authenticated with Captain Portal, you cannot do that now. That was a feature request at some point to be able to allow certain sites, even when you're not authenticated via Captain Portal. But some sites, obviously, you can't use IP because they're huge sites and their IPs are always changing. So that's a nice new feature. Tons of other localization fixes and some other bug fixes. We are now trying to show all dates everywhere in the server time. In some cases, in the previous, they were being shown in the client's browser's time, which if you administer Untangle boxes in other time zones can get very, very confusing very quickly. We added more root certificates to the CA store, so in some cases sites weren't being trusted when they should be. All sorts of other enhancements that hopefully will improve your experience. I have a question about HPS Inspector. Any way to make it not show the SSL warning on the client side? Unfortunately, that is just the downside of doing SSL man in the middle. To get around that, you have to load the certificate on the browser, the CA from Untangle on the browser, so that Untangle can create these forgeries. You can read about the docs about all sorts of ways to do this. An easy way to do this is to just go to your Untangle IP in the browser. A lot of people do this by group policy object or something, but if you just want to do it in a specific case, just go to your Untangle IP/cert. And basically then, except you have to type in the IP, right? Then it's better. And then you'll get a pop-up saying, do you want to do this? No, yeah, sure, I'll trust this. So yeah, you have to import the cert in some way or another to do that. So at that point now I have the cert installed in this browser. If you want to do it for all sorts of other machines, you can do group policy objects. You can use Captain Portal to give them a warning saying you have to install this. There's all sorts of ways to get around that. But unfortunately, it's one of the downsides of doing full SSL inspection is you have to push out this CA to all your machines. Group policy object does not work with Firefox. It uses its own cert store. Yes, that's true. Firefox doesn't use the OS one, so you have to push it out in a different way. I'm not sure off the top of my head what that is. Each browser has its own challenges, unfortunately, when it comes to SSL. Are there any Captain Portal improvements to how clients, especially Android and Apply products, quote, are notified that users need to log in? That's actually not a feature of Untangle. I mean, it's cool that they alert you that there's a Captain Portal, but that's a feature in those OSs themselves. They detect that a Captain Portal's up and then they say something. We certainly go to links to help them do that, but more or less it's a feature of those devices. So Android, I know, works pretty well. We do a lot of things like blocking prefetches. A lot of devices prefetch, and so they get really confused if you send them a redirect to the Captain Portal login page when they prefetch Google. So we have to do things like block those requests and try to make sure it doesn't get itself confused. But more or less, unfortunately, that's a function of the device itself, which we have no control over, whether or not it alerts you about a Captain Portal. Any config changes in the spam blocker? There were some. Actually, we reweighted a couple rules. There's a new spam assassin, which doesn't really matter, but there were no major changes aside from the switch to Bitdefender.
Okay, well, it looks like we're running low on time here. We want to keep it to an hour, so if you have any final questions, now's the time to get them in via our question and answer panel.
Sorry about all the audio issues we had. It's kind of a mess of a webinar. We spent a lot of it dealing with audio issues, and there were a lot of questions asked. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get to. But hopefully we'll have a recording of this webinar up pretty soon. And if you have any more questions, please jump on the forums. We can answer as many as we can, as best as we can, I should say.
You have a couple final questions here. The webinar recording should be available within the next 24 hours or so. The IC control product, that's correct. It is an appliance-only thing. It is not a downloadable software option.
And if you have any questions after playing with 11.0, just jump on the forums, or you can contact support. Support right now is really, really busy. We have a whole bunch of new support staff. Unfortunately, they're extremely busy. But give us a call or send us an email. If you do that, always submit your UID, especially if you're a paid user, so that they can put you in the paid queue. That makes sure you don't go into the free user queue, because we have tons and tons of free users contact us with help. That's great. We love that. Unfortunately, we have to put our paid users in front, so we have different queues. So, as always, if you are a paid user, make sure you submit your UID so that we can verify you're paid and make sure you go in the right queue so we can help you as soon as possible. Thank you, everybody, for joining. I really appreciate your time. Sorry about all the audio issues. Please give us your feedback on 11.0.